You see, the reason I'm so positive in my Christian faith and preach the way I do is the positivity I know because I know that my sin is forgiven. I know that Christ died for me. I know when he died on the cross, he was the atonement for my sin. I know because I know, and I preach with confidence. Do you understand? So faith is substance and evidence. I could say, look, I can jump up and down on the floor here. I'm not going to do it because I'll shake the camera, but I could jump up and down here in faith. I know that this won't collapse. So faith has to be translated from a mystic theory into become substance. And if you look for, Paul goes on to explain it. First of all, he says in verse 4, by faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice. In verse 5, by faith, Enoch was translated, so he didn't see death. He didn't die, you know. Enoch didn't die. He was taken into heaven. There's two who didn't die, Enoch and Moses, certainly. But in verse 6, saying without faith, it's impossible to please God. And then in verse 7, by faith, Noah was warned in a dream about things that he hadn't seen. Noah was warned that he had to build this ark big enough to take all these animals. I mean, it does actually say in the Bible how big it is. It's an enormous size on dry land. He was laughed at. But why did he do it? Because faith became substance. By faith, in verse 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go into a place which he would afterwards receive as inheritance, obeyed and went out, not knowing where he went. Wow, that's faith, isn't it? Abraham actually left a luxurious lifestyle. You read, Abraham lived in a magnificent mansion. His sons were driving Mercedes or whatever. They had sheep and cattle. He left the wealth to go and live in a desert. Why? Because he went out not knowing where he went. His faith was translated into obedience. And then it says, this was with Abraham by faith. Sarah believed that she could conceive despite her age and her husband's age. And out of that was to come so many miracles. Again, in verse 17, by faith, Abraham, when he was being tested, offered up his only son. And remember, Isaac was the son born by faith in old age, you know. And faith, and Isaac was to become, as we now know, the forefather of Jesus himself. And yet, when called, Abraham took his son to that hilltop, took the knife, and was going to kill him and let him become the sacrifice. How could he do that? Because he had the confidence in his faith that God would fulfill the promise. Even if he killed the son of promise, God would not fail to keep his promise. Oh, come on, come on. Do you understand the power of faith to convince us that God will never, ever, ever fail to keep his promise? So that even though everything around us seems to conspire against it, God won't fail. You know, somebody once described faith, and there are 3 levels of faith. The first level of faith is you believe in something because all the evidence is there it's going to happen. That's most people's level. The second level of faith is you're believing in something when there's nothing at all, nothing to support you, nothing to convince you. But the third level of faith is when everything is against. Everything means it can't happen. Faith is when it's impossible, absolutely impossible. And one sent like me with that throat cancer. It was impossible. On the Friday, they had said the cancer was so big I was choking to death. But I had the faith to believe that when I went on the Monday, I was totally healed. But you see, do you see the power of faith? And I want you to understand that faith has to become that level of reality. And then we go on. I mean, in verse 24, by faith Moses, when he was of an age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Verse 25. This is interesting. Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Oof. He chose rather to suffer affliction by faith than to simply take the rewards of sin. And you know what that was? That was because he was the adopted daughter of Pharaoh's own daughter. Do you understand? Faith has to be translated into action.